shooter's side of this story that is now emerging after weeks of protests across the nation demanding justice for this young man, Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old unarmed teen and killed last month. George Zimmerman has yet to be arrested now and believes that Mr. Zimmerman fired in self-defense in this case, which was the original claim. That's why the police did not arrest him on the scene. Zimmerman's attorney says he has been fully cooperating with law enforcement officials on all of this.
Other than being under a lot of stress from the situation and being very concerned about the grave situation that he's in, and you know, there's a young man who's now deceased and in this situation, so he's very concerned about that. He has, by my counsel, and been very cooperative with all the investigations done by the Sanford Police and FDLE, and at this point, he's cooperated.
Well, Joe Oliver is a longtime friend of George Zimmerman, and he's known the shooter for 6 years. He joins us now. Joe, welcome. Good to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Now, as I understand it, your wife is friendly with Mr. Zimmerman's mother-in-law, and you spoke with him over the weekend.
Very close friends, yes.
And you spoke with him over the weekend. Tell me what he said to you. What did he convey to you, and what made you decide to get in the middle of this?
Well, I've been trying to get in touch with George ever since this started, realizing that he was going to need help, particularly with dealing with the media, and that's where I came into play. And I had not been able to get in touch with him until this past weekend. And the conversation was very brief, and it was mostly to validate what I had learned through his family members in order to make sure I was doing the right thing by stepping out and speaking on his behalf.
What did he say to you about what happened that night?
Well, I can't go into details because that's what's going to come out when the grand jury convenes. The biggest problem with all of this has been the information hasn't come out. So Florida law enforcement has a history of providing a lot of information before a trial ever starts. Casey Anthony, my case in point, I use that as the example. But in this case, they have determined that it is better not to provide the information, and I think that's because of the history of the Sanford Police Department when it comes to race relations. The police chief who has temporarily stepped down, police chief Lee, it's my understanding he was hired because of those bad relationships, and things had gotten better until this shooting happened. But that's also my belief as to why it's been passed on to the state's attorney, who passed it on to another state's attorney, and now it's going to be gone over by a grand jury because the Sanford Police Department is trying to show the world that they did everything right, not just by George, but by Trayvon as well.
But what was your understanding of what he thought his role is as a neighborhood watchman? You know, and why would he's out there with a gun following this young man? You know, what do you think he was doing in his mind? What was his role in the neighborhood?
He was doing the right thing, and here's the biggest problem with him having a gun was the portrayal that you just presented. You made it sound like he's stalking him with a gun, and when the evidence comes out, everybody's going to find out that that is so far from the truth. There's a lot of things that I would love to say, but this is George's life, and it's his call on what can and can't be said.
Let's listen to a part of the 911 call that may lead a lot of people to feel that way, at least based on what they know so far. Let's listen to this.
Which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
About that, when you hear that, I mean, they clearly say, you can hear him sort of breathing heavy, and he sounds like he's running, following him. He says, yes, I'm following him. They said, we don't need you to do that.
Correct. But we don't know what happened from the time George got out of the car and the time he actually was face-to-face with Trayvon Martin and that gun went off. And that's the hole that has to be filled, and that's the information that the police have as far as the evidence they have gathered and will present to the grand jury.
Is there any suggestion that the gun went off accidentally in anything that you have heard?
There's a very real possibility of that.
You know, I'm curious what you think about the racial issue that has been brought up by all of this, and whether or not you think it's plausible, knowing George Zimmerman, that he used the epithet that has been associated with that part that was bleeped out there. And then I'd also like you to address what you think of the president's statement on this on Friday.
Well, I read all of the president's statement on Friday, and what has been broadcast is true. If he had a son, he would look a lot like Trayvon Martin. But that was prefaced by the president saying we've got to let justice run its course. And what we're seeing with the reaction has come from, first of all, a mischaracterization from the very beginning of George Zimmerman as being white, a mischaracterization